Security's Town Hall series on maritime cybersecurity. My objective is to present timely and relevant topics in the maritime cyber community and discuss them with technical, logistical, and yes, even sometimes political considerations. A good maritime phrase is a rising tide raises all boats, and with this series, I'm hoping to contribute to that rising tide in a meaningful and collaborative way. For those who don't know me, I'm a retired Coast Guard officer. My career in the Coast Guard was heavy in IT and cyber, so it's not just a job to me, it's also a hobby and a passion. I also am the VP of Maritime Cybersecurity for MAD Security. We're a managed services company specializing in cybersecurity, particularly in maritime and with the defense industrial base. So what I'm trying to do here is raise the bar for maritime cybersecurity and bring folks together to solve challenges and to understand how we can work together to protect our ports and waterways. The Coast Guard's final rule became effective on July 16th, and it establishes requirements across the maritime transportation system. For the first time, it formally requires a cybersecurity officer in addition to the already existing facility security officer. So what we're going to do today is explore the differences and the similarities, the roles and responsibilities between these roles and also the owner operator. So we're going to try to talk about who does what within the organizational construct. And what's interesting is that once you've seen one port, you've seen one port. And so many times the lines between these two roles might be blurred, they might be shared, but the bottom line is that they have to be integrated so that everyone is covering what needs to be covered and that nothing is missed. And so we're going to explore what the rule says and then some best practices of how these two roles can work together to ensure cybersecurity in the maritime ports and cyber. So 33 CFR 101, Subpart F, sets minimum cybersecurity standards for all MTSA regulated facilities. Cyber incidents are now considered transportation security incidents if they interrupt port operations. And one of the things we see is, of course, that OT comes into play really significantly within the construct of transportation security incidents. So IT can impact OT and vice versa if the systems aren't segmented or if they're purposely integrated. So the integration of IT and OT and the continuing convergence of those systems is central to compliance. And the Coast Guard's final rule on maritime cybersecurity is very, very clear on the need to segment and/or make sure that those OT systems are secured in order to make sure that cyber safety is addressed. And there is a difference between cybersecurity and cyber safety. Enforcement is held via the Coast Guard and the captain of the port. So that is a role as well that we'll be discussing as we go through these slides and through this discussion. Okay, so now that we actually understand the why, let's look at who is actually responsible under the new rule. The Coast Guard's done their best to define roles, but as we know, things are different or unique within every organization. So these are general phraseologies to discuss what each role generally does, and we'll need to apply them to each individual organization to make sure that all issues are addressed. At the top, you have your owner operator, right? And they're ultimately accountable for compliance. When I was a young ensign on board a ship with the Coast Guard, there was a line in the standing orders that really stuck with me still even to this day. And it said that as captain of the ship, I am totally and inescapably responsible for the safety and security of this ship. And so even though we have the FSO, CySO, called out in 33 CFR and other places, the owner operator has ultimate accountability for that compliance, of course. And that's delegated down, and the FSO and CySO have their roles in doing that. The next is the facility security officer, or FSO. Traditionally, the FSO has managed physical security, your gates, your fences, your cameras, access control. But now under the final rule, that scope expands to include cybersecurity coordination. So the FSO's job is to make sure that physical and cybersecurity are integrated, that drills, exercises, and plans all work with each other. So the FSO and the CySO need to be in lockstep. As my friend and mentor, John Felker, once said, physical and cybersecurity are inextricably linked. And if you have physical access to a cyber system, you own that cyber system. If you own the cyber system, you are going to be able to potentially affect physical impacts upon a port. So those two things cannot be just split one for one and assigned. The FSO has these, the CySO has these, because there are overlaps in all frameworks between what physical security is and what cybersecurity is. So then we have the new role that everybody's talking about, and that's the cybersecurity officer or CySO. This is the person who's responsible for leading and implementing cybersecurity and monitoring and incident response within the facility. So think of the CySO as the digital counterpart to the facility security officer, where the FSO locks down physical access, the CySO locks down network access. And depending on the organization, the CySO might be internal, somebody who you've appointed internally, or it could be a qualified third party. In some cases where you have a smaller organization that doesn't have a technical cybersecurity expert, a CISO level kind of person, it might make sense to have a third party that really knows what they're doing to come in and implement and monitor your cybersecurity program. The owner operator must designate the CySO in writing by July 16th, 2027. The problem with that date of July 16th, 2027 is that there's a lot of other things that are also due that day, including facility security assessment. And as we all know, training is required. Training requirements are required by January of this coming year. So I would implore everyone to identify a CySO much earlier than July 2027, because you want somebody with CySO level understanding and talent to be able to implement your training program, to be able to call out how that assessment's going to go and to conduct it in a way that makes sense for the risk posture, the threat posture of your organization. And let's not forget, this isn't all about leadership roles. All personnel with access to IT or OT have responsibilities under this rule, particularly with respect to training. Everyone needs to complete the cybersecurity training, understand and recognize a cyber incident, and know how to report it. That's what's required in the rule. So for most organizations, that means building cybersecurity awareness into daily operations, not just a one-time class. It needs to be part of your exercises and your drills. Finally, overseeing all of this is the captain of the port and the U.S. Coast Guard. They're responsible for oversight, inspection, and enforcement, verifying that facilities and vessels are following those practices and acting in a way that keeps commerce flowing and keeps us all safe and operating as a country. Now I'm going to drill down into some of these roles. So the first one is the owner operator. What do they actually have to do under the new rule? Because they're ultimately responsible. So it starts with ensuring that all of these things happen. As an owner operator, they should be very familiar with what the requirements are, and the FSO and the CySO should be talking to them about how they're doing this, how they're implementing this strategy. So the cybersecurity assessment, which is covered under 33 CFR 101.630, it's the foundation of everything else. It's your deep dive into how your IT and OT systems connect, where your vulnerabilities are, and how to create or how a cyber event could impact your operations or safety. The Coast Guard wants owners and operators to understand their terrain, not just where their servers are, but how information flows between them. I liken it to a navigation chart, right? What are all the assets that you oversee? When you have a chart, on that chart, you have all the information that you need to safely navigate. You need to, as part of this assessment, take an inventory of all the different systems that are within your responsibility and whose degradation of confidentiality, integrity, or availability might result in a transportation security incident. And those are the ones that you specifically want to focus on, including any linkages you might have to those. Once you've mapped out the landscape, then the next step is develop your cybersecurity plan. And a lot of people already have their facility security plan updated to include a cyber annex or have integrated cyber within their facility security plan. But those need to be updated, and they need to be a living document so that when when changes happen to your environment or your workflows, that those are maintained. And so those shouldn't just be something that you complete, get approved, and put on the shelf. Those should be a guide for how you're doing business and how you're protecting your organization. So the cyber incident response plan is also critical. Business continuity is pivotal. As we've seen, there are very advanced parties and nation states that are gaining access to our systems. It is impossible, I'll go ahead and use that word, to ensure that you will never be breached, that no one's ever going to get past your perimeter defenses. We've seen instances where adversaries have exploited the supply chain, even so far as embedding malware into patches. And when folks implement their patches, now they're breached. So really, one of the focuses needs to be on your incident response. How are you going to recover if you're hit, and or when you're hit, depending on how you look at it. And so having that business continuity plan in place, your incident response plan in place is key, and exercising that regularly so that all parties know their roles is pivotal. Those two documents are then going to work hand in hand to cover that. Then there's one of the biggest new requirements, and that's that the owner operator has to designate a CySO in writing by July 16th, 2027. Hopefully earlier, as I've said. I would recommend as soon as possible. But that person becomes the single point of contact for cybersecurity implementation and incident coordination. The Coast Guard doesn't care if it's an internal employee or a qualified third party. What matters is that they're capable, documented, and accountable. And I'm going to kind of foot stomp that, because just taking someone in your organization and assigning them that title, if they don't have the credentials and the experience and the expertise, is going to be a really bad decision in the long run and maybe the short run. So it's really important that the owner and operator take time to establish a good requirement list for what that CySO needs to be in order to conduct that role. Next, you have your training drills and exercises. You have to make sure that those are conducted and documented. And as an owner operator, one of the key things you can do is to be involved, is to actually take an active interest in these. When you do a tabletop exercise for incident response, ultimately, a lot of those decisions are made at the owner operator level. What happens when you get ransomware? How are you going to deal with a ransomware actor? In many cases, your CySO or FSO aren't going to be empowered to make decisions that impact the business. So the owner operator has to be involved, has to have a preset list of potential events that occur and scenarios that occur, so that they can respond and make sure that they're not figuring it out on the fly in the middle of a cyber battle. So the rule requires at least 2 drills per year and 1 exercise annually. And those can be combined with physical security exercises as well. But the cyber exercises need to be clearly included. You'll also need to maintain incident reporting and monitoring under 33 CFR 101.640 through 650. This covers continuous monitoring, detection, and reporting of any cyber event that could impact operations. And remember, it's not just about technology. It's also about processes, very, very largely. So who monitors those alerts? Who validates incidents? How do they report those? What is the vetting chain for that? How is your legal counsel involved? All those things have to be addressed. This is much bigger than a cyber problem. And finally, everything has to be documented and retained for Coast Guard inspection. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So keeping active records, and I'd recommend either one central document where all the events are recorded, or something similar to that, a folder where you put artifacts in. But when the Coast Guard comes to inspect, just like any auditor in any field, it would be a good idea to have the records of what you've done, how you've done it, what the impacts were. And by providing that documentation to an auditor, whether it's the Coast Guard or anybody else, you're going to be on your best foot, as opposed to trying to explain to them about the tabletop exercise you did a year ago, but don't have any documentation for it. So this documentation is not just a good practice, it's required. The bottom line with the owner operator is that they're the quarterback here. They're responsible for making sure that all the moving pieces, the plans, the people come together for one coherent cybersecurity program. Some of those actions and responsibilities are delegated down to the FSO and the CySO, but ultimately the owner operator is totally and inescapably responsible for what happens with their facilities. Let's shift our focus now to the role of the facility security officer. And this is kind of the old familiar. FSOs have been in place since the early 2000s, following 9/11 and the establishment of the Maritime Transportation Security Act. So the FSO has always been the backbone of this, and they've been the de facto actor for anything within the port as it pertains to security, to include cyber in the past. Cyber's almost been, part of their role, but it was sort of a collateral in some cases. It just depends on the port where you are. But the facility security plan, which the FSO is responsible for, controls physical access, and they usually work with law enforcement and the Coast Guard. FSOs are responsible for protecting people, cargo, and infrastructure, the physical side of security these days. Under the new rule, the FSO's world is actually expanding, not contracting. Coast Guard's no longer drawing a line between physical and cyber. They recognize that something like a ransomware attack on your terminal's gate system can cause the same level of disruption as a physical breach. So the FSO and the CySO have to be integrated throughout the security process. Now the FSO plays a key role in making sure that cyber risks are woven directly into the facility security assessment and the facility security plan. And when you're doing your drills and exercises, which is the next bullet, it's important to make sure that you have cyber and physical integration, that all of those elements are considered. It's not about rewriting the whole plan in this case. It's about making sure the cyber piece is fully understood and then integrated. So speaking of working together, the partnership between the FSO and the CySO is crucial. The FSO brings deep operational knowledge, usually how the facility runs, who's on site, what's mission critical, a lot of historical as well. The CySO brings in that technical insight, how those systems connect, how they can fail, how to protect them. So together, the FSO and the CySO can create a unified picture of operational and cyber risk, and something that neither one would fully achieve alone. And one of the things that I've historically foot stomped is the importance of integrating cyber risk into all other enterprise risks. In fact, I teach a course at the University of New Haven on cyber risk, and my very first quiz is a one question, true or false question, and it's true or false. Cyber risks are so specialized that they should be developed and maintained separate from other enterprise risks. And the answer is false. Cyber risks should be integrated into the enterprise risks. And then that way they can be evaluated with the same lens that the owner operator evaluates weather risks, physical risks, supply chain risks, etc. So in short, the FSO is now the bridge between physical and digital security. And the collaboration marks a big shift for the industry, but it's also a huge opportunity to bring cybersecurity into focus and make it a consideration, where before it's been an afterthought or a compartmented side thought, for lack of a better term. So let's now talk about the CySO, who's the new kid on the block. So this is the most significant addition to the Coast Guard's final rule from a role and responsibility perspective. And for the first time, every MTSA regulated vessel and facility must formally designate someone responsible for cybersecurity oversight. And the job isn't to own IT or fix firewalls, it's to ensure the organization's entire cybersecurity posture aligns with the Coast Guard's expectations. So you can think of the CySO as the link between technology, operations, and the compliance world. So under the final rule, the CySO is responsible for implementing the cybersecurity plan and the cyber incident response plan. They make sure continuous monitoring is happening, that incidents are detected, responded to, and reported, and that the documentation, including cyber training records, drills, and logs, are all in order when the Coast Guard comes to inspect. So in many ways, the CySO is the digital counterpart to the FSO. One key point, the CySO doesn't have to be an employee. The Coast Guard made it clear in the FAQs that you can contract that role out as long as they're qualified. Then they can do that for you, work with the FSO if it's appropriate. So what does a good CySO look like? When you're hiring somebody, what are you looking for? It should be someone who understands maritime operations, not just IT, and can translate cyber risk into operational impact. One of the worst things, in my humble opinion, that folks can do is just take their FSO and say, now you're the CySO too. Or take their existing IT person and just relabel them as also a CySO. That's doing a disservice to them. IT management and IT operations is a different skill set than cybersecurity risk determination and understanding. Just because you understand computers doesn't mean that you understand the risks to them. And I almost liken it to, lawyers. You wouldn't go to a family lawyer for a criminal law case, right? Even though to some owner operators, technology people all look like technology people, and there's no distinction. There's a big distinction between those folks who are good at putting IT and IT operations in place, and those folks who understand how to secure those systems and what the threats to them are. So a good CySO will know what happens when a network goes down mid-transfer and what those impacts are, and is thinking ahead as far as what the scenarios would be and how to continue operations in those different elements. And so my final slide here is talking about integration, not separation. So your FSO manages your FSP while your CySO manages your cybersecurity plan and the cybersecurity portion of your facility security plan. The FSO's main focus is on physical access, whereas CySO is focused on IT, OT, and digital assets. Your FSO and CySO should be working together to conduct drills under both MTSA and 33 CFR, and where possible, you should combine those. And then as far as reporting goes, FSO and CySO both have reporting responsibilities. FSOs must report incidents that may cause a TSI, and then the CySO has to do reports to, as far as cybersecurity incidents go, to the NRC and/or the captain of the port. So this sort of shows you that there's nuance between the roles, but having somebody who understands both, and it's really almost impossible for someone to fully understand both of these roles, for any one individual to be able to have both a very, very strong physical security background and a very, very strong cybersecurity background. It just doesn't happen very often that you see that. With that, I've done a lot of talking, and I'll take some questions. All right. Oops, got 2 in the chat already. All right. So the first one is, if you're in a small facility, how do you keep costs down and cover both bases? That's a really good question. That's where I would say having a fractional CySO would come in handy. Getting someone who is known throughout the community, who's trusted throughout the community, who can set up and establish those types of things. Not every organization, as I mentioned earlier in the briefing, which this played right into, can afford somebody with CySO level cybersecurity background who also understands maritime. So I think in a lot of cases, these small ports, even if they are going to designate, go ahead and say, hey, look, my FSO equals my CySO, which is, I think, a tough decision to make. That individual is going to need external help from somebody who really knows what they're doing. And I would say that best time to do that is now. Find someone who can help you to strategically establish that training plan, your how you're going to inventory everything, how you're going to assign priority, how you're going to resolve a transportation security incident should it arise. How are you going to keep business continuity flowing? And so that doesn't have to be a full-time employee. That can be, you know, somebody who's fractional, just like a lot of folks have lawyers on retainer and things like that. So for those smaller ports, that's going to make a lot more sense than going out and funding a an expensive CySO level kind of billet. Hope that answers that question. All right. Next question: what types of certification should CySO have? This is a really good question. So certifications are interesting in the world of cybersecurity. I would say that there's the obvious ones, right? CISSP, somebody who has a broad background in cybersecurity, but you're also going to want somebody that understands, you know, IEC 62443, OT system. So you're going to want somebody who understands IT and OT and has enough technical chops to be able to understand IT networks technologically, while also having that C-level understanding of what risks actually are, coupled with how the maritime environment operates and what happens when these systems go down. So I would say, you know, finding someone a decent technical background with very good cyber risk management and an understanding of the maritime operations and OT systems is going to be an important thing to do. Any other questions? Yeah, so the CySO has to be reported in writing by July of 2027. Again, I recommend that happen far earlier than that. That you get that person on board quickly, so that you're not, you know, and some of this is cost savings as well, right? Like you can actually, by getting ahead of this and doing things smartly, you can't and shouldn't protect everything in the port like it was Fort Knox. And a good CySO will understand that and say, hey, look, these are where the crown jewels are. So let's do a crown jewel assessment, figure out, you know, what are our priority one where things, you know, might result in a transportation security incident. And let's make it a point to protect those first. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time. Truly appreciate it. And hopefully you all have a great rest of your day. Feel free to reach out to me at any point, cliff@madsecurity.com. If you have any questions, want to talk cyber, as you all know, I'm more than happy to talk about it day or night. So feel free to hit me up. And other than that, have a safe and wonderful rest of your day.